Voyager's set down on a planet for maintenance, which means pulling a fair portion of the engines apart. It also means people just walking about on the nacelles, which feels like an OSHA violation to me, but I'll admit it's in keeping with Starfleet's usual approach to self-preservation. Things are going to take a while, which is not what Janeway wants to hear. As power goes down unexpectedly, Ramrod manages to solve the problem and impress B'Elanna in the process. This lad's got a bright future in Starfleet. Janeway agrees and upgrades him from postal worker to B'Elanna's assistant in the hopes of speeding things up. Not everybody's working on maintenance, and the Delta Flyer Jr. is off looking for supplies. Seven, Neelix and Kim are near some space fog seeking dilithium, but instead find a couple of ships having a bit of a Barney. One of them sends out a distress call, and despite Kim's insistence that they not get involved, the others immediately convince him to get involved. This is why you're still a fucking ensign, son. The vessel asking for assistance says it's a medical ship, which I think raises some questions about why it was cloaked, but nobody else seems to care. Calling the attacker to ask if maybe they wouldn't mind not doing some murder results in them telling us to go fuck ourselves. Seven tells Kim they're charging weapons, which is a bit odd when they were just firing. He does a science and makes them kaboom their own guns, causing them to leg it. Well, we're involved now, so Kim decides to go all in and pop over there to lend a hand. I'm sure the people on the ship we just attacked will simply move on with their lives and not return with a load of mates to shank us. The medical ship has a lot of injured and dead people on it, though you could argue that's the best place for them. As Kim's trying to figure out who's in charge, two people arrive with special medical guns like the ones frequently found in genuine hospitals. Learning that we're here to help calms them a little, though that calm takes a hit when we discover that all the officers are dead. The people with guns have no idea how to help with getting things running, as they say they're just passengers. Presumably those special medical guns must have been special passenger guns, and the hospital is also a taxi. It's all perfectly above board. Kim wants to get the engines running, but the passengers say the cloak is more important, as it's their only defense. Feels like a pretty shit one if the other ship was able to shoot them while invisible, but let's ignore that for now. To work, and Kim is fixing things while talking to a guy we found on the bridge. It's his first trip out, which means he probably holds the galactic speedrun for promotion to captain now all the officers are dead. Captain Cadet's in awe of all the things Kim knows and assumes he's a captain too, which is just rubbing salt in the wound, really. He's also a bit shaken up by how badly things have gone on his first assignment, but bonds a little with Kim after learning that something similar happened to him. Except for the bit with the promotion, obviously. Speaking of the newly promoted, Ramrod is still working with B'Elanna. Janeway's wish to speed things up has come true, largely thanks to his input, and B'Elanna is complimentary. So much so that she takes an interest in his recreational activities. Or, more accurately, lack of them. When he says he doesn't have much free time, she suggests that he should find some and come rock climbing on the holodeck with her. The last time we saw her rock climbing resulted in Neelix nearly carking it, but I suppose it's the thought that counts. The medical ship is back up and running, with both the cloak and the engines online. That would be great if there was anybody left who knew how to fly the sodding thing. Captain Cadet is only trained in shuttles, so he's out. One of the passengers, who seems to have significantly more sway than he should, asks Kim to stay and be their pilot. It's very important too, as he's a doctor and has done a vaccine or some bollocks. In case you're having trouble penetrating my subtle hints, I think this whole thing is dodgy as fuck. Kim disagrees, and the fact that their flight takes them past where Voyager's currently landed seems to seal the deal. Arriving at the planet causes things to become slightly more complicated. There are some ships in orbit, ones that belong to the people who Kim sent packing. And they've introduced themselves to Janeway, not aggressively, but in friendship. We're even sorting out a trade. A concerned call from Kim lets Janeway tell him everything's fine and they've made new friends. Dr. Dodgy warns him that this is just a ploy and Voyager's in danger. After the ships in orbit have buggered off, Kim gives Janeway another call to let her know what's really happened, and we all go to the meeting room for a chat. Dr. Dodgy pleads his case, but Janeway says she wants time to consider things. And by consider things, I mean find a way of ignoring Starfleet rules to not get involved. It's not difficult, she just waits for Kim to cite all the times that she's done it before. That said, his argument might have less to do with their plight than giving him an opportunity to be in command of a mission. That's why he resists the idea of someone else taking charge, wanting to be the one to do it himself. Janeway allows it on the condition of sending Seven as well, with the argument that her not having a rank means he outranks her. I'm pretty sure that also means she can just ignore him if she wants to, but let's see how it turns out. Ramrod's in sick bay to make repairs. Well, partly. He's also there to get help on social interaction from the doc. He's specifically interested in how you can tell when somebody's attracted to you, so I assume he's misread B'Elanna's interest in his recreational activities. Well, that and him not having spoken to anybody else this episode. Social cues are all well and good, but he wants proof, so the doc lists some physical symptoms indicative of attraction. That they're also indicative of heightened physical activity, such as, I don't know, rock climbing for example, will cause no problems whatsoever. Time for Kim to take over on that medical ship. I was under the impression that he was here to fly it, what with that literally being the thing that they said they needed, but he's instead taking the captain's chair. Maybe Captain Cadet has managed to figure out the helm and didn't want to upset Kim by saying that they didn't need him anymore. In fact, Captain Cadet isn't the only one who's gained skills. One of the passengers is now suddenly fluent in controlling shields and weapons. How odd for a member of a vaccine research team on a medical ship. Kim's too busy to notice. He's redecorated the office that he's going to have for a couple of days, making the rather odd choice of bringing a saxophone. Maybe the bad review of his clarinet playing that he got back in Virtuoso made him switch instruments. As well as redecorating, he's also micromanaging everybody, both actions being viewed negatively by Seven. Let's catch up with Ramrod's subplot, shall we? He and B'Elanna are in Jeffrey's tubes and working closely together, not that there's much of a choice given the confined space. I'd imagine it's also quite physically demanding, which might explain the tricorder readings that Ramrod's receiving. Oh dear. Back on the USS Definitely a Medical Ship Honest, their cloak is throwing a bit of a wobbly. They get it running again, but Dr. Dodgy is worried about future issues, and Seven suggests running tests. Kim overrules them both, and is a bit of a dick about it to boot, causing Seven to call him out on his bullshit once the others have left. Pointing out that Janeway neither micromanages nor steamrollers people, well, usually, seems to get Kim thinking. If he'd planned on changing his command style, he's shit out of luck as events run away from him. The cloak fails and a few enemy ships spot them before flying over for a look. They're joined by some mates who all decide that it's time for pooping. Seven tries to make repairs, only for the ship to disagree and do a kaboom in her face. Kim wants to go and help, but after a second passenger offers to go in his place, he agrees to delegate. Probably just as well, really. She drags Seven to safety before going back in to try and repair things. Kim starts to give technical advice, only for Dr. Dodgy to talk over him and give her exactly the instructions she needs to get it working again. We recloak and scarp her, but she's not responding anymore. To be fair, dead people usually don't, so it's not a fault of hers. Kim asks Dr. Dodgy how best to treat Seven, and when it becomes apparent that he hasn't got a bloody clue, Kim finally realizes that this whole thing stinks and demands the truth. Dr. Dodgy admits that he's not a doctor, but rather from a team working on cloaking technology in a remote lab. This ship is a prototype, but he assures Kim that it's because their enemies are laying siege to his planet and they need the cloak to make supply runs. We don't ask why the planet itself, one serious enough to have its own shield, doesn't create its own food and medicine. Either way, it's enough to make Kim decide he's had enough. He orders Captain Cadet to turn around, which is pretty fucking optimistic of him under the circumstances. It goes about as well as you'd expect, and Kim's brief foray into command ends pretty much how we'd all expected it to. Paris bumps into Ramrod in a corridor and, after joking about Ramrod seeing a lot of his wife, invites him to another social activity on the holodeck. Unfortunately, the activity is a race, and that sounds an awful lot like a challenge to Ramrod. Clearly, this is a trial by combat for the affections of B'Elanna and can't be permitted to continue. He tells her that for the sake of her marriage, she must put aside her infatuation with him and move on. A bemused B'Elanna agrees and allows him to leave, perhaps because this doesn't even come close to being the most awkward romantic moment she's experienced on Voyager. Seven's awake and ready to return to work, leaving Kim to explain why that's not going to happen. The mutineers are allowing them to take an escape pod and bugger off, a plan that I suspect will end poorly as soon as they leave the cloak. In a bizarre turn of events, Seven tries to argue that Kim should still be helping the people who've lied to us about their intentions. I mean, okay, one of them saved her, but she wouldn't have been injured in the first place if they'd known the enemy was so interested in this ship that they'd be immediately attacked. Her arguments seem to convince Kim for reasons of closure rather than ethics, essentially boiling down to this whole thing might be fucked, but you agreed to it before you knew it was fucked, so you have to stick with it. He returns to the bridge and retakes control, the people who just did a mutiny apparently being fine with this. Perhaps it's because they're in a bit of a pickle. We've arrived at their planet, but the enemy are doing a wibbly science thing to detect cloaked vessels, and they can't figure out how to get through. Maybe they just want someone to blame when it all goes to shit. At least they're not alone, as things are going to shit for Voyager too. Some of the opponent's ships have turned up, and having learned that Kim attacked one of their mates, are disinclined to carry on with their trading arrangement, which I think is fair enough. They've got orders to escort Voyager out of their space, which seems generous for people we've been told are bastards, but let's ignore that for now. It'll have to be at sublight speeds too, as Voyager isn't finished working on the warp engines. Here's hoping their space is very small, or that's going to be quite the journey at Impulse. As they're being slowly frog-marched away, Kim's plan is going pear-shaped. Well, I say plan, but it looks like his idea was to just fly the ship at the science wibblies and get spotted. Pooping happens and their ship does kabooms. Things start failing all over the place, so Kim calls one of the attacking ships and surrenders, much to the dismay of Dr. Dodgy. It's fine though, as Kim has no intention of going through with it and only wants to buy time. The attackers agree to let the crew reach the surface in escape pods in exchange for the ship and the cloaking tech it carries. Once Dr. Dodgy is away, Kim does a science to the tractor beam trying to pull in their ship and is sharply propelled through the shield as well. That's a masterful plan, as long as you don't think too hard about what it would have done to the ship when we were just told that structural integrity was failing. Voyager's out of hostile territory, and their escorts have just buggered off. Time to find Kim, I suppose, but that's a job made somewhat easier by the fact that he's sitting in a cloaked ship right next to Voyager. I guess they found a way to get back off the planet through those science wibblies. Kim goes to grab some food, and we leave him to ignore all the ethical implications of his actions and instead contemplate his ability to command, as we fly away. I don't know if it's because I've learned to see the underlying formula by now, or if it really was that obvious, but being able to call out the twist of a story shortly after the title sequence does not reflect well on a show. We could probably go deeper and examine why there tends to be a twist in the first place, but that's a bigger conversation. It's not helped by the arse falling out of the story in the last 10 minutes or so. It's entirely nonsensical, things happening for reasons that don't go beyond the plot requiring them. Seven arguing in favour of assistance, Kim agreeing, them permitting it to happen, this need to break the blockade in the first place instead of just transmitting data about the cloak straight to the surface. They all exist purely to enable Kim's little redemption arc, or as much of a redemption as you can get when you've just facilitated the spread of tech that fundamentally changes the balance of power for an interplanetary war about which you know fuck all. It's just so completely unsatisfying. Gods know I've been banging on about Kim needing more screen time to flesh out the character, but how is this really any different to the last time we saw that? In the Season 5 episode Warhead, Kim was a cocky little twat and, after buggering things up, was humbled and became introspective. If that sounds familiar, it's because this is basically the same premise, only with a far less competent ending. We haven't learned anything new about him, we've just had something repeated. If anything, you could argue that's worse, as it shows he's actually regressed slightly, going back to how he was before the events of Warhead. While I have your ear, I want to take issue with a line in the episode. As Neelix is offering some advice, he utters the following. If you're going to be a captain, you need to act like a captain. Never admit you're uncertain about anything. You can't be indecisive in front of your crew. I've no doubt that there are captains for whom this is true, but one of Janeway's most redeeming qualities in my eyes has been that she's willing to listen to those around her and change course based on their counsel. She does it in this episode, in fact, by listening to Kim's argument in favour of aid. Janeway's a scientist. Being uncertain is an inherent requirement of the job. Exploration and research are the stated primary aims of Starfleet as a whole. They're here to learn, and learning requires operating from a position of relative ignorance. Too many people consider Starfleet to be a primarily military organisation. The shows and films themselves are largely to blame for this, as they each have a quota of kabooms to fit in. But assuming those in command should fit the stereotype of a battleship captain is entirely missing the point. It's the sort of thing I might have expected to hear from the Neelix of Season 1 or 2, but he's shown such growth since then, and it feels out of place now. If we're generous, it could be that 6 years in frequently hostile territory has made Neelix recall the above-average number of times we've been in combat, but it's odd that Kim himself doesn't pick up on the dissonance between Neelix's advice and Janeway's actions. It should be obvious by now that I was not a fan of this one. Again, that's a genuine shame, as I really do think there's potential in the character of Harry Kim. How disappointing, then, that the writers don't seem to agree. End of episode.
Why do you want to give us jobs in Section 31?
Not just anybody would have been able to tell a shapeshifter from the subtle clues we assume you picked up on.
Clues, yeah, that's definitely why we killed him.
Absolutely. We knew all along.
We'll want to know all about that when we get you back to our operations center, so we can use the techniques you found.
Techniques? Right. Shit. I mean, great.
And what would happen if, and I'm asking this purely hypothetically, of course, but what would happen if we didn't want the jobs?
Well, hypothetically, we'd have to assume you're traitors.
And traitors get shot. Eventually, anyways. After the other stuff.
Fuck.
Hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we brief them on the techniques now?
Because we don't have them.
We could even use your office. For privacy.
My office. Yeah, let's do that. It's just through here. Make yourselves comfortable.
We'll go and grab some coffee.
How did dogs get an office?
And why does it look like an airlock?